History books tell us the Roman Empire died in 476 AD. But look around. You see the ghosts of the Caesars are still writing your laws, building your cities, and deciding the very words you speak today. We are taught that the flame of the eternal city was snuffed out by the boots of barbarians and the weight of its own decadence. We see the fractured marble of the Colosseum and the weed-choked stones of the Forum, and we just assumed the story ended there. But look closer at the world you inhabit. Notice the way the sunlight strikes the towering white domes of Washington, D.C., or the way the grand avenues of Paris mirror the geometry of an ancient legionary camp. Authoritatively, believe it or not, this is not a coincidence. It is an inheritance, a shadow cast across 15 centuries. The majesty of Rome did not crumble into the dust of history. It underwent a profound, invisible metamorphosis. While the legions vanished and the emperors faded into myth, the spirit of the empire executed the most successful vanishing act in the history of mankind. It did not die, it simply moved. It slipped into the foundations of our courts, the structure of our religions, and the very blueprint of our civilizations. Today, we peel back the layers of time to reveal a shocking truth. You see, you are not living in the aftermath of Rome. You are living inside its continuation. This is the story of how an empire that supposedly fell became the indestructible architect of the modern world. How did a civilization that breathed its last breath over a millennium ago still hold the reins of power today? The answer lies not in the ruins, but in the hidden echoes of an empire that refused to remain in the grave. History books have a favorite date. It is 476 AD. They paint it as the year the sky turned black, the year the very marble of the Forum cracked under the boots of unwashed savages, and the light of civilization was snuffed out for 1,000 years. Intense. We are taught that the Roman Empire, that absolute titan of the Mediterranean, simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but broken columns and a world plunged into ignorance. The scene is iconic. You see the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus stripped of his purple cloak by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. A funeral for the greatest power the world had ever known. But if you look through the smoke and the dust of those crumbling walls, a different story emerges. An insightful story of a calculated transition rather than a chaotic end. If this was truly the death of Rome, why was the funeral so remarkably Roman? Authoritatively, just observe these supposed barbarian conquerors for a moment. Odoacer did not burn the city to the ground. He did not outlaw the Roman way of life. Instead, believe it or not, he did something far more intriguing. He sent the imperial crown and robes back to the east, to Constantinople, with a message that changed everything. The West no longer needs its own emperor. One in the east is enough. Suddenly, the barbarians were not destroyers, they were caretakers. They actually kept the Roman Senate in session. Fascinated, they preserved the complex tax codes that funded the legions. Awestruck, they even minted coins with the faces of emperors. Most importantly, they kept the language of the empire alive. Passionately, Latin did not die in the streets of Rome. It became the heartbeat of the new elite.
What we have been told was a collapse was, in reality, a strategic retreat. The bureaucracy of Rome, that invisible skeleton of the empire, did not break. It simply found a new body to inhabit. The legions may have changed their banners, but the laws, the roads, and the very soul of Roman administration remained intact. But this raises a chilling question. If the barbarians were not the ones who truly ended Rome, then who was actually holding the reins during the so-called Dark Ages? Because, while the emperors were gone, a much older, much more mysterious power was quietly stepping out from the shadows of the ruins. Constantine the Great, well, he was not a man of sentiment. He was, quite literally, a master of the strategic pivot. While the marble of the Forum in Rome began to weather and the old Senate grew stagnant with tradition, Constantine looked toward the sun rising in the east. You see, he saw a city sitting on the threshold of two worlds, Byzantium. He didn't see a ruin to be managed. He saw a fortress to be forged. By the year 330, Constantine had done the unthinkable. He had uprooted the very heart of the empire and transplanted it 1,000 miles away to the glittering shores of the Bosporus. He called it Nova Roma, New Rome, but history, history would remember it as Constantinople. This was no desperate retreat, right? This was the rebranding of a global enterprise. Within these walls, shielded by the sea and triple-layered stone, the Roman spirit didn't just survive, it thrived. It traded the dusty plains of Gaul for the silk and spices of the Orient, ensuring that the Roman flame would burn for another 11 centuries while the West flickered in the dark. Decades later, another visionary, Justinian, would take this dream even further. Inspired, he didn't just want to preserve Rome. You see, he wanted to codify its soul. Grandiose, he rebuilt the city in gold and light, crowning it with Hagia Sophia, a dome so massive and radiant it was said to be suspended by a golden chain from heaven itself. Justinian's lawyers spent years condensing a millennium of Roman law into a single code, a legal skeleton that still supports the justice systems of our modern world today. Yet, as the political center moved east, something even more profound was happening back in the shadows of the old city. Intriguing, while the emperors were preoccupied with their new golden capital, a vacuum of power had opened in Italy. Wise, and in the world of empires, power never truly vanishes, it merely changes shape. For centuries, the Roman emperor had held a specific, sacred title, Pontifex Maximus. It meant the greatest bridge builder, the high priest who connected the gods to the state. Dramatic. But as the legions marched out of Rome, the title stayed behind. It began to find a new home, not in the hands of a general or a senator, but within the rising walls of a young and resilient institution, the Church. This was the ultimate transformation. The powerful administrative genius of the Roman bureaucrats and the spiritual authority of the ancient high priests were merging into a new kind of throne. But as the bishops of Rome began to wear the robes of the old elite, they weren't just inheriting a religion, whispering. They were inheriting a ghost, grave, and this ghost had a very specific plan for how the world should be ruled, one that would turn the Dark Ages into something far more coordinated and far more dangerous than anyone could have predicted.
The physical walls of the empire were crumbling, but the architectural blueprint of power remained perfectly intact. You see, it was a tactical retreat, a migration from the battlefield to the cathedral. As the last legions laid down their swords, a new kind of soldier emerged, one who didn't fight for territory, but for the very conscience of mankind. This was the moment the Roman spirit realized a profound truth. Borders are fragile, but belief is eternal. The genius of Rome had always been its bureaucracy, a machine, really, that knew how to collect taxes, enforce laws, and maintain order across vast, untamed distances. When the emperors failed, the bishops didn't tear that machine down. They simply took the controls. The Roman Senate, that ancient body of elite power that had governed for centuries, did not vanish into the dust of history. It evolved.
It became the Roman Curia, the administrative heart of the church. The toga gave way to the cassock, and the incense of the temple was replaced by the smoke of the altar. But the hand on the lever of power? Well, it remained remarkably the same. To solidify this transition, the world was presented with what would become one of the most audacious documents in human history, the donation of Constantine. Now, while later centuries would reveal the document as a brilliant fabrication, its immediate effect was absolute. Powerful, it provided the legal and spiritual foundation for a new kind of Caesar to sit upon a throne in Rome, a figure who claimed authority not just over the bodies of men, but over their eternal souls. The very geography of the old world was repurposed with surgical precision. Instructive, the Roman administrative districts, known as dioceses, were not redrawn or abandoned, they were simply rebranded. Firmly, the imperial prefects were replaced by bishops, and the rigid Roman law was translated into the language of the Spirit. Cinematic, the hierarchy of the church became a mirror image of the imperial military and civil service, creating a chain of command that stretched from the smallest village to the very heights of the Vatican. Rome had shed its skin, discarding the heavy weight of dying legions to become a metaphysical superpower. Inspired by moving the seat of authority from the sword to the scripture, the empire ensured it would never truly die. But as this new spiritual Rome began to flex its muscles, it realized that an empire of spirits still required a physical hammer to enforce its will. And to find that hammer, well, the church would have to look beyond the ruins of the old world and into the shadows of the north toward a man who would become the ultimate instrument of their grand design. The legions were the hardware of Rome, and the marble of the Forum was its casing. But you see, the empire possessed something far more enduring, an invisible code that dictated how every citizen lived, traded, and sought justice. This, my friends, was the software of Western civilization. Regally, in the 6th century, amidst the shimmering mosaics of Constantinople, Emperor Justinian realized that an empire is only as strong as its memory. Thoughtfully, he looked upon a chaotic mess of contradictory edicts and forgotten decrees, and, well, he made a decision that would outlast every monument ever built in stone. Proudly, he commissioned the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law.
It was a monumental undertaking, a titan of literature that condensed 1,000 years of Roman wisdom into a single, cohesive system. For centuries, this massive legal undertaking lay dormant, buried under the dust of the Dark Ages as Europe fell into the localized chaos of feudalism. But the code did not die. It waited. In the 11th century, in the quiet libraries of Italy, scholars rediscovered these ancient scrolls. As they brushed away the grime of centuries, they realized they hadn't just found an old book. Actually, they had found the skeletal structure of a functioning world. This is the ghost in the machine of our modern lives. When you walk into a courtroom today, right, you are stepping into a Roman ritual governed by Roman logic. The very concept that a person is innocent until proven guilty is not a modern invention. It is a Roman heartbeat, pulsing through the ages. From the complexities of property rights to the fine print of a business contract, we are still using the tools forged by Justinian's scribes. The Roman Empire did not need to occupy our land to conquer us. It simply occupied our minds. We live within the parameters of their justice, thinking their thoughts and following their rules of order. Yet,
While the law provided the logic and the church provided the spirit, there was still one more way the empire ensured its immortality. To truly understand how Rome became eternal, we have to look past the parchment and into the very stones of the world, where an ancient secret was hidden in plain sight, one that allowed Rome to build a future that would never crumble. Walk through the streets of any modern capital today, and you see you are not merely walking through a 21st century city, you are walking through a dream dreamt 2,000 years ago. When the borders of the Western Empire finally dissolved, well, the legions didn't just vanish into the mists of history. No, they left behind a blueprint that would dictate the very shape of our world. Listen closely. To the conversations in the cafes of Madrid, the bistros of Paris, or the plazas of Rome itself. You aren't hearing the death of Latin, you are hearing its evolution. We call them the Romance languages, a title that feels poetic, right? Yet its origin is purely imperial. These are the living breaths of a fallen giant. Every time a Spanish speaker describes the sun or an Italian speaks of the heart, they are using the modified vocabulary of the centurions. Rome surrendered its physical territory, but in return, get this, it seized the tongues of half the planet. It ensured that even if its banners were burned, its thoughts would be whispered in every corner of the earth for eternity. But this ghost empire, it didn't stop at the tip of the tongue. It carved its immortality into the very stone beneath our feet. Just look at the seats of power in Washington, D.C., the grand facades of London, or the soaring domes of Berlin. This is neoclassical architecture, you see, a deliberate resurrection of Roman grandeur. We build our temples of justice with Roman columns and our halls of governance under Roman arches because instinctively we still associate their aesthetic with the ultimate expression of order. Philosophically, we mimic their marble, not out of a lack of creativity, but because the Roman image of power is so deeply embedded in our collective psyche that we cannot imagine authority looking any other way.
This was the ultimate survival strategy, though it came at a staggering cost. To become eternal, Rome had to die as a nation. It traded its physical walls for the boundaries of our minds. It exchanged its gold for our laws, its swords for our scripts, and its identity for a global influence that no legion, no matter how disciplined, could ever hope to conquer. The empire didn't lose its land. It simply moved house, taking up residence in the very foundation of Western civilization. Yet, as this invisible Rome expanded across the globe, it carried with it a hidden shadow. In its quest to become the mind of the world, it left behind a series of silent, haunting questions that still linger in the corridors of power today. Because while the stone and the language remain, something essential was lost in the transition, a secret that the emperors took to their graves and one that we are only just beginning to uncover. The year 476, it was never an ending. You see, it was a metamorphosis. We look at the ruins of the Colosseum and we see a skeleton, yet somehow we fail to notice the ghost that has taken up residence in our very streets. Now, Rome did not crumble into the dust. It dissolved into the foundations of every city you have ever known. It is the invisible empire, a civilization that traded its physical borders for the very boundaries of the human mind. When you walk past a courthouse with those towering white columns and symmetrical pediments, you are walking through the shadow of the Forum. When you speak of justice, of liberty, or of the Republic, you see you are speaking the dialect of the emperors.
Even the roads beneath your feet and the very calendar that dictates your life, well, these are artifacts of a power that refused to die. The fall of Rome was, in truth, its greatest victory. Softly, it became so ubiquitous, so ingrained in the fabric of our existence that we simply stopped noticing it was even there. The legions are gone, and the emperors have long since returned to the earth, but the spirit of the eternal city, it has never been more alive. It lives in the structure of our governments, the logic of our laws, and the very cadence of our language. Rome is not a closed chapter in a textbook. No, it is the world we inhabit every single day. Take a moment today, just a moment, to look at the architecture of your city. Listen to the roots of the words that fall from your lips. Realize that, in every way that matters, you are still a citizen of the empire. I mean, the epic is not lost, it is merely hidden in plain sight. If you are ready to continue uncovering the secrets of our hidden past and the forces that still shape our world, subscribe to Hidden Epic Narratives. The story is far from over, right? And the next discovery, it is waiting just beneath the surface. Stay curious and keep searching for the truth in the shadows of history.